You ever just look at a cat and really think about our whole deal with them? I mean, they're our pets, they're the kings of the internet, sure, but for a huge chunk of history, they've also been, well, something way more complicated. This is a story about a centuries old scam, some mind blowing evolution, and the really weird lines we draw between the animals we love and the animals we eat. So, in Spanish, there's this amazing phrase, dar gato por liebre. Literally, it means to give a cat for a hare. These days, it just means you've been totally tricked or ripped off. Like, say you booked a fancy hotel online and ended up in some dingy little room. Yep, they gave you a cat for a hare. But hold on, that's a really specific scam, isn't it? A cat for a hare? Why those two? It's not just some random pairing of animals. The real answer actually takes us back a few hundred years to a con that was surprisingly common, born out of pure hunger and sneaky opportunity. Okay, so to really get this, we have to travel back in time. We're talking 16th, 17th century Spain. Back then, travel was slow, it was pretty dangerous, and it was just exhausting. And you know who makes the perfect target? A weary traveler at the end of a very long day. So picture this. You've been on horseback for days. You're cold, you're starving, you're bone tired, and you finally stumble into a posada, a little roadside inn. You order a big, hot bowl of hare stew, which was a real treat back then. But the innkeeper, he knows you're just passing through. He's never going to see you again. So he decides to save a few bucks. He swaps out that pricey hare for a common street cat, drown it in a thick, savory stew, and who's going to know the difference, right? Now, this scam got so common that travelers actually came up with this weird, superstitious defense. Before they'd take a bite, they'd lean over their plate and whisper this little rhyme, almost like a magic spell, hoping it would expose the imposter cat. It just goes to show how deep that mistrust ran. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, that's a weird bit of history, a scam from forever ago. But the thing is, the great food switch, passing off one kind of meat for another, it's still very much a thing. The players might have changed, but the game is exactly the same. There's this dark Russian joke that just perfectly captures that same old fear. What am I really eating here? It seems like that ancient traveler's anxiety is still alive and kicking today. But here's the thing. It isn't just a joke. It's a documented fact. An animal association in Shanghai decided to investigate. They took 12 different samples of what was being sold as mutton from street vendors. And the DNA results? 2 of those 12 samples came back positive for cat meat. And the modern scam is pretty much a carbon copy of the old one. The motive is just cutting costs, plain and simple. Investigators think the meat is often just the leftover flesh from the cat fur trade. And just like in the old days, there are these crazy rumors about how they disguise it, like soaking it in sheep urine to make it taste more like lamb. It's a pretty grim reminder that this stuff is still happening all over the world. And this is where the story takes a really wild biological turn, because there is a profound irony here. The animal that's been chosen for centuries as this cheap, disposable substitute for a grass eater is actually one of nature's most perfect killing machines. I mean, just think about that for a second. We've got this top-tier predator, a hunter so finely tuned by evolution, being passed off as its own prey. This isn't just a sneaky trick on a dinner plate. It's a total flip-flop of the food chain. And when you look at the science of what a cat is, it gets even more incredible. So, scientists have a name for this, hypercarnivore. It means an animal that absolutely has to get at least 70% of its food from meat. Now, a dog is a carnivore, sure, but they can get by on other stuff. Cats? Cats are obligate hypercarnivores. For them, it is not a choice. Meat isn't just what they like. It's what their entire body is built from the ground up to consume. Their bodies are just these masterpieces of predatory design. You've got the super flexible spine, those lightning-fast reflexes, the powerful muscles. All of it is optimized for the hunt. And it goes all the way down to their DNA, with these expanded gene families that are all about muscle contraction and fine motor skills. They are, quite literally, built to kill. But, to get that good at something, evolution always makes a bargain. There are trade-offs. Cats gained this incredible sensitivity to amino acids, which is literally the taste of meat, and they even beefed up their DNA repair systems to handle an all-meat diet. But what did they lose? They completely lost the ability to taste sweetness. They just ditched the genes needed to process sugars and starches. Don't need them. Okay, so we've got this highly specialized predator being passed off as your average prey. Which naturally brings up a very practical question, right? What does a predator actually taste like?
Well, the few first-hand accounts are kinda all over the place. One perspective says that because they're so lean and muscular, the meat wouldn't have much fat on it, and less fat usually means, well, less flavor.
But then you hear a totally different take. Another description calls it a little gamey, like wild meat. And because of all that dense muscle, it's also kind of stringy and tough, which, when you think about it, makes perfect sense for an animal built for short, explosive bursts of movement. Maybe the best way to wrap your head around it is this analogy someone came up with. They said the difference you taste between beef and horse meat is pretty similar to the difference you'd find between chicken and cat. It at least gives you a frame of reference for how different a predator's meat might be.
But this whole thing, it goes way deeper than just biology or curiosity about taste. There's this powerful psychological conflict that happens when we're forced to look at an animal we see as a companion, another carnivore just like us, in a way, and see it as food, especially when survival is on the line. And for this last part of our story, we have to go to the most remote place on Earth, Antarctica, in the year 1912. An expedition set out to map the vast, unknown continent. But what started as a journey of discovery turned into an absolute nightmare of survival, one that forced the men to make a truly impossible choice. It was a catastrophe. One of the explorers fell into a massive crevasse, and he took most of their food, their tent, and their best dogs with him. The two survivors, Mawson and Mertz, were suddenly hundreds of miles from safety with almost nothing. Their only remaining food source? Their own loyal sled dogs. One of them, Xavier Mertz, eventually died on that trek. And yeah, the physical strain was unimaginable. But a closer look at what happened suggests something else was at play. The massive psychological trauma of eating the very dogs he had raised and cared for every single day. It seems the mental weight of that choice was just as deadly as the hunger and the cold. And that brings us all the way back to that animal that might be sitting on your couch right now. From a shady inn in 17th century Spain to a food stall in Shanghai to the frozen ice of Antarctica, cats and dogs have always occupied this really strange space for us. They're predators we've brought into our homes, companions we adore, and yet, in some places, in some situations, they're protein. It really forces you to think about the lines we draw. So the ultimate question is, who gets to decide?